Hi everyone, welcome to SINCON 2021. I'm Aaron and I'm very pleased to be speaking to you today about eCrime, and I hope to offer you some interesting insights into a very thriving criminal underground that exists today. Without further ado, let's get started. First, a quick introduction of myself. I'm Aaron and I'm part of CrowdStrike Intelligence. I've been at the company for almost a year now, and prior to industry, I spent a decade in the military as an intelligence officer. I first got my start in cybersecurity about 5 years ago, and I was assigned to build the then nascent Cyber Command in Singapore, also known as the Defense Cyber Organization. I then took a leave of faith, to join industry about 3 years ago now, and before CrowdStrike, I was at Recorded Future for 2 years, supporting both public and private institutions, to develop their threat intelligence programs. In my free time, I'm involved in youth mentoring initiatives, and I help with the local SENS community. So here are our main topics of discussion today. First, we will take a few moments to look at how cybercrime or eCrime was back in the day. Next, we will take stock of the current state of eCrime. And thereafter, in the spirit of understanding the inner workings of the criminal underground, we will dissect the notion of everything as a service on the criminal underground. And in the concluding segment, I would like to take the opportunity to offer some recommendations around how you can better defend your organization from the scourge of eCrime. So first, let's look at how eCrime was back in the day. And this is really the central theme of how it was like back in the day. Criminal actors worked very much independently of one another, orchestrating their attacks and pursuing their respective objectives alone. The idea of an ecosystem was foreign. Criminals had to be self-sufficient, and they had to develop their own end-to-end tooling to support all phases of an attack. And to give everyone a sense of how it was like back in the day, let's spend a few moments now to talk about how things were for some of these eCrime OGs. Let's start with one of the most prolific and enduring eCrime adversary, Carbon Spider. For those among you who have been following eCrime for a while now, you may know Carbon Spider with a different name. You may know Carbon Spider as the Cabernet Group or the Cabernet Gang. When Carbon Spider first started out in around 2013, their targeting profile was specifically focused on points of sales terminals to steal payment card data. In 2016, parts of the group split to form a new group known at CrowdStrike as Cobalt Spider, which specifically targets the financial services industry. And at this point in time, Carbon Spider remained focused on stealing payment card data. Their modus operandi was straightforward: steal payment card data, package the information up, and peddle them on the carding shops within the criminal underground. And to give you a sense of the scale of Carbon Spider's activity, at the peak of their activity, Carbon Spider was one of the top sellers on Joker Stash. For those who have been following eCrime for a while now, you would know that before Joker Stash shut its doors in January this year, it was the most prolific carding shop for a good number of years. And this just bears testament to how successful Carbon Spider was back in the day. And next, we have Wizard Spider, who is one of the most, or probably the most sophisticated eCrime adversary to date. Active since 2016, their members held key roles with the then Dyer Group and a few other criminal groups. Wizard Spider started on their own eCrime journey in earnest with the trick bot banking Trojan, and from there, they independently expanded on their tooling, but they never advertised any of their tools or offered any of their services on the criminal underground. Wizard Spider has always been very selective with whom they choose to work with, and they will not collaborate with just any novice criminal. In 2018, Wizard Spider started orchestrating big game hunting ransomware operations with the real ransomware. They were one of the pioneers in the big game hunting space, and started this form of targeted ransomware operations even before the notion of big game hunting became mainstream. And in the 5 years that they have been around, Wizard Spider has developed an entire repertoire of sophisticated tools that enables them to independently prosecute targets across the entire queue chain. And here's a glimpse of how Wizard Spider came to being. The members of Wizard Spider first worked together on the Zeus banking Trojan around 2009. The person that would eventually lead Wizard Spider was close to the person who led the effort behind the Zeus banking Trojan. And because of that close relationship, the Wizard Spider eventual leader was able to influence the design and development of Zeus. Subsequently, the group that the Wizard Spider eventual leader ran was known as Jabber Zeus, because the group was using Jabber as their primary communications medium to notify them when banking credentials were successfully stolen. The group evolved and became Game Over Zeus, and Game Over Zeus was a huge success and raked in millions of dollars for the group every month. The Game Over Zeus botnet got taken down in 2014, and then what happened is that the group split, with some getting together to build a tool known as DriceDex, which is used by another CrowdStrike named eCrime adversary known as Indrik Spider, while the others moved to Dyer, right, with the leader of Wizard Spider starting that group and went on to build the Dyer banking Trojan. Dyer was basically ran like a professional business. You know, the group rented their own office spaces, had robust and established, operations, right? And all this continued for a while until, right, their office spaces, right, were physically raided by the FSB in Russia. This led to the Dyer group closing down, but this also then led to the genesis of Wizard Spider. And last but not least, we have Doppelspider, who's been active since 2019. And Doppelspider is actually a splinter group of Indrik Spider, right? Remember the group that we just discussed in the previous slide, the adversaries behind DriceDex, right? So when Doppelspider, or the group that formed Doppelspider, left Indrik Spider, they actually took with them, right, the code base of DriceDex and BitPaymer, right, and created their own variants dubbed as DoppelDriceDex and DoppelPaymer, right, with DoppelDriceDex being a loader and DoppelPaymer being a ransomware. And between the tooling, right, developed by Doppelspider and the predecessor variants, there was actually significant code differences, and Doppelspider's tooling also employed more modern technologies. In terms of attack sequence, or TTPs, right, Doppelspider and Indrik Spider bears many similarities. Right? Doppelspider will typically employ DoppelDriceDex, right, to pull down the DoppelPaymer payload, and DoppelPaymer would then be deployed enterprise-wide in the victim organization. Adopting a conceptual overview of how DoppelDriceDex carry out such an attack, right, it typically looks something like this. Right? Doppelspider first achieves initial access into the target environment. Right? And this is typically achieved with a compromised user account, which is typically either bought from the criminal underground or Doppelspider stealing the credentials themselves. They would then install DoppelDriceDex with PowerShell Empire, and thereafter they would attempt to escalate their privileges to a point where they get to, right, to get to what they are after, right, which is typically domain admin level privileges. And with that, Doppelspider would then install DoppelDriceDex on the domain controller via PowerShell Empire, and then DoppelDriceDex would facilitate the estate-wide deployment of DoppelPaymer, right, which is then used to compel a hefty ransom payment from the victim organization. So now we have seen how life as an eCrime OG was, right? Before we delve into the details of how eCrime is like as an ecosystem today, let's see where we are at, right, at a high level with eCrime today. Let's look at an overview of the recent intrusion activity, right? And over the course of the past 2 years, right, you can see from this graph, it should be evident that there has been an observed 400% increase in the volume of intrusion activity being orchestrated by the entire gamut of adversaries out there. It should also be apparent, right, that the percentage of intrusion activity attributed to state-sponsored adversaries actually remained relatively consistent. Right, but the activity attributed to eCrime adversaries have surged exponentially over the past 2 years. And of course, as you probably can surmise, right, eCrime attacks are a major contributing factor, right, to the surge, right, in the intrusion activity that has yet been attributed, right, to date, right, that shows up as unassigned on this particular graph. And when we think about eCrime, right, almost immediately ransomware comes to mind. Right, and here's a breakdown of the most prolific variants of ransomware in use as observed at CrowdStrike Intelligence over the first half of 2021. And many of them represented here are prolific across Asia Pacific. Let's speak to a few of these examples. First, we have Avedon, right, or Riddle Spider, the adversary behind that particular ransomware. Right, Avedon was very active before they went dormant about 5 months ago now. Clock, right, the Clock ransomware, or Graceful Spider, right, the adversary behind the cloud ransomware, was similarly and is similarly active, right? They were the ones who exploited the vulnerabilities affecting the file transfer service Acelian in January this year, and this attack hit really close to home because one of our major telcos was one of their victims. Right? The Conti ransomware, right, or Wizard Spider, right, has a global targeting history, right? As we have kind of earlier alluded to, right, they are a mature and sophisticated adversary. One of the few ransomware operators that possesses extensive tooling, right, to prosecute their attacks independently. The DarkSide ransomware, right, was very active before the Colonial Pipeline incident, right? And ever since its retirement, right, the adversary behind the DarkSide ransomware, otherwise known as Carbon Spider, is definitely not down and out, right? And we will discuss about this in a segment that follows shortly. Doppelpaymer, right, or Doppelspider, right, just as we have discussed a few slides ago, right, they have actually recently ceased operations of the Doppelpaymer ransomware, but is now out and about with the Grief ransomware. And any ransomware discussion will not be complete, right, without the mention of the REvil or Revil ransomware, right, otherwise, known at CrowdStrike, as Pinchy Spider, right, as the adversary behind the ransomware, right. So Revil or REvil went dormant shortly after the prolific attack on JBS, right. The infrastructure came back online as of about last month, right. They seem to be facing some teething issues when they first came back online, but now they are very much in action again. But really, ransomware is really just the tip of the iceberg when we think of eCrime, right? So now, as we go into this ecosystem, right, let's get a glimpse of how eCrime adversaries are known to collaborate with one another. These are some of the eCrime adversaries that are known to enable big game hunting ransomware operations, right? Lunar Spider is responsible for the development, operations, and sale of Bugbot. Prophet Spider is responsible for GoThroat and Kikotech, right? And Mallet Spider is responsible for Quackbot. And now, let's look at some of the prolific ransomware operators. Sprite Spider, who's responsible for the Defray 777 ransomware, or Twisted Spider, who's responsible for the Mace and Egregor ransomware, right? Noting the fact that Mace is no longer in use, right? Doppel Spider, whom we have mentioned multiple instances up to this point already, responsible for Doppelpaymer and now Grief, right? And we have the operators of the Prologue ransomware. So this is how they collaborate, right? Lunar Spider sells access to Bugbot, right, to both Sprite Spider and Twisted Spider. Mallet Spider selling access to Quackbot to Twisted Spider, Doppel Spider, and Prologue operators, right? And now, equipped with the tools to support the upstream attack phases, these big game hunting adversaries, right, would be enabled to deploy, right, their ransomware proper across the victim environment. Right, and in the case of Doppel Spider, right, we also observe, in addition to the ransomware, right, their custom downloader is also being put down into the victim environment, right, and this is just an example of enabling additional tools, right, to be introduced, right, for other nefarious purposes. So as you have just witnessed, right, just a snapshot of the eCrime ecosystem, right, it should be clear, it should be becoming clear that eCrime is in fact a very prolific and thriving ecosystem, right? As we embark on this deep dive, right, it's important to share some of these key observations of this prolific ecosystem, right? First, there is unprecedented cooperation between multiple eCrime adversaries, right, working together to achieve common financial goals, right? There is also the notion of comparative advantage at play, right? A macroeconomic principle, right, at play within the criminal underground, right? You see adversaries pursuing specialization and developing best of breed tools, right? The best example, right, is none other than Emotet, right, or Mummy Spider, right, the adversary behind the Emotet, right, loader, right? Mummy Spider was squarely focused on the specialization, on the development of Emotet, and focused on peddling Emotet to others, right? Of course, Emotet, or by extension, Mummy Spider is now down and out, right? We have also observed eCrime adversaries adopting rapid development cycles, right, to adapt to open source reporting on their malware. So it's almost the equivalent of eCrime adversaries taking to agile development, right? A core tenet of DevOps, right, to stay effective, right, with their attacks. And of course, Ransomware-as-a-Service has proven to be a very viable business model, right? And with with ransomware as a service now readily available, right, it fundamentally lowers the barrier of entry for novice criminals, right, to employ ransomware as part of their attacks, and it also mainstreams the deployment of ransomware as part of eCrime attacks today. So overall, as much as we like to think that there is no honor amongst thieves, right, we are observing this novel phenomenon of cyber criminals or eCrime adversaries working together as part of a prolific ecosystem. And the eCrime ecosystem can really be thought of these numerous criminal actors working together to achieve a common goal, right, of to monetize some kind of cyber attack, right, and it encompasses these three main components, right. The services component, right, is about criminal actors offering each other ways to enable their criminal activity. So ransomware as a service, malware as a service are just some of the more common examples that fall within this services component. Distribution, right, distribution is about getting, facilitating, right, getting the weaponized payloads, right, from the adversary to their victims, right, looking at adversaries that specialize in offering that conduit or the mechanism. And last but not least, there is the monetization component of the ecosystem, where this typically what this is about is after a breach has occurred, right, this monetization component is about facilitating the realization of the financial objectives of the attack. And this is really a lay of the land view of the eCrime ecosystem, right. As you can see, ransomware is a substantive component of services, but there is evidently a lot of quote-unquote other bad stuff, right, that's being offered as a product or service, right, to the highest bidder. And this gets us to the heart of our conversation today, right, understanding how everything is available as a service today on the criminal underground, right. And we will take the next segment, right, to take a deep dive into these prolific elements. So let's start with ransomware as a service, right. And when we talk about ransomware as a service, right, one of the best examples out there to speak to is the Thanos ransomware. Thanos is interesting in ransomware because it basically allows anyone to build their own ransomware tool. It is actually a ransomware builder that's written in .NET and is actively being sold on Russian-speaking criminal forums. Right? And there are different tiers of Thanos being sold. Right? There is an entry level, there is a mid level, and there's the highest tier level. Right? And purchasing Thanos at the highest tier is akin to purchasing for support from the developer forever. Right? And we have observed at CrowdStrike, right, that the Thanos ransomware is being actively employed by low-level criminals, right, which lowers the barrier of entry into ransomware operations. But at the same time, we have also observed some state-sponsored adversaries, particularly two kittens, right? Kittens being the cryptonym that CrowdStrike uses on adversaries that bears a nexus to the Iranian government, right? And we saw two kittens using Thanos as part of their repertoire. So it's also interesting at the same time, right, to observe typically sophisticated adversaries, right, taking to quote-unquote easy tooling, right, for their actions in cyberspace. And here's a screenshot of how the Thanos ransomware builder actually looks like. You can see on the top segment, there is the option to create keys, right? And there's, of course, there is that option to incorporate recovery information, right, on the top right-hand corner of the builder, right? And this recovery information is actually really the ransom note, right? What do you want the ransom note to say, right? And as you can see, right, many options and functionalities are available in the builder, right? And this makes it exceedingly easy, right, to create a Thanos ransomware variant, right? And after you're done with these steps within the builder, right, you're actually only left with a final step of figuring out how to deliver the ransomware to your target. So enough about the Thanos ransomware, right? When we talked about ransomware as a service, right, we also see ransomware as a service being substantively utilized in the realm of big game hunting, right? And the prime example is found in the recent prolific attack on the Colonial Pipeline in the US. Just a little bit background on this incident, right? If you're unaware, Colonial Pipeline is the largest pipeline for refined oil products in the US, right? It provides gasoline, home heating oil, aviation fuel, and other refined petroleum products to the south and eastern seaboard in the US, right? It carries about 3 million barrels of fuel each day from Texas to New York. The DarkSide ransomware, which was then available as a ransomware as a service, was behind the attack on the Colonial Pipeline. Right? The ransomware crippled the billing system at Colonial, and though the OT systems were not affected, right, Colonial Pipeline decided to shut down the pipeline as a precaution, right, due to the concern that the hackers might have obtained information that would allow them to carry out further attacks on vulnerable parts of the pipeline. And in true big game hunting fashion, the adversaries stole nearly 100 gigabytes of data, right, and threatened to release it on the internet if the ransom was not paid. It was reported that within hours after the attack, the company paid a ransom of nearly 75 bitcoins, which was about $5 million at that point in time, to the hackers, right, in exchange for a decryption tool, right, which ironically proved so slow, right, that Colonial's own backups, right, were used to actually bring their systems back online. And of course, the impact of such an attack on critical infrastructure was far-reaching, right? Fuel shortages was encountered, right, in at least 7 airports across the eastern seaboard in the US, which led to massive disruptions to air travel, right? And the media sensationalization of the attack also resulted in some panic across the general population, which led to the skyrocketing of fuel prices. So who is behind the dark side ransomware, right? As I've already alluded to earlier, right, the dark side ransomware is attributed to none other than Carbon Spider. But wait, right, didn't we talk about Carbon Spider earlier today? But we talked about Carbon Spider in the spirit of being focused on targeting points of sale systems instead of orchestrating ransomware operations. So how did we get here? Right, so it turns out in early 2020, right, with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown that followed, right, the opportunity to target points of sale systems dwindled, right, because everything went online, right. E-commerce took over brick and mortar, right, shops in terms of sales, right. So that's also when Carbon Spider actually decided to get in on the big game hunting ransomware game, right. Initially, they partnered Pinchy Spider, right, to deploy the Revil or R-Evil ransomware as an affiliate, right, so on a profit-sharing model with Pinchy Spider, right. Then in August 2020, right, Carbon Spider decided to commit to big game hunting and developed and used their own ransomware, right, also none other than the Darkside ransomware. And since the introduction of Darkside, right, there has been consistent updates to the ransomware, right. And shortly after, in November 2020, right, Carbon Spider established, right, the affiliate program for Darkside, right, offering Darkside as a ransomware-as-a-service. And of course, right, as most of us are aware, right, after the prolific attack on Colonial Pipeline, Carbon Spider was met with a severe law enforcement response, right, which resulted in a series of physical arrests and takedowns of Darkside's infrastructure, right. The group then also announced that they would cease Darkside operations, right, which was assessed to be then the group's attempt to lay low, right, after the amount of heat that was being directed at them. During the period when Darkside was taken out of production, CrowdStrike Intelligence actually interestingly continued to observe activity that can be attributed to Carbon Spider, right. We observed attacks that employed tooling that mostly overlaps with Carbon Spider, right, with the exception of using actually an open source ransomware by the name of Hidden Tier instead of the then retired Darkside. Right. And this phase of Carbon Spider introducing new tools and TTPs in a post-Darkside world continued for a while until the emergence of black matter. So in late July, right, CrowdStrike Intelligence confirmed the existence of a new ransomware-as-a-service dubbed as black matter, right? And it was quickly discovered that there are cosmetic and technical similarities between the now defunct Darkside and black matter. Right, there is significant overlaps in the code base, and there are many aesthetic similarities in both ransomware's control panels, right, as well as their respective dedicated leak sites. Right. During the same period, there was also a Russian language forum member, right, that goes by the same name, right, that goes by black matter on the underground, right, advertising interest in purchasing and executing unauthorized access, right, to corporate networks. Right. This persona sought to purchase accesses in the US, Canada, Australia, and the UK, and in true big game hunting style, was only interested in purchasing access packages of sizable organizations, right? Stating that annual revenues of organizations must be more than 100 million in USD, right, and must have 500 to 15,000 hosts, right? And since the emergence of the black matter ransomware, right, the ransomware has been successfully deployed against at least 40 victims, right? The victim organization spans numerous sectors and regions, demonstrating the opportunistic nature, right, of ransomware campaigns, right? And several ransom payments, right, issued to relatively large companies have topped more than $10 million, right, US dollars. So clearly, Carbon Spider does not show any sign of stopping anytime soon, So we can expect, right, black matter campaigns to continue in the short term. So enough on Ransomware-as-a-Service, right? Now let's shift gears and speak to an emergent class of eCrime adversaries known as access brokers, right? To help us understand how access brokerage typically works, here's a conceptual abstraction of what typically happens. First, a bot herder starts with an initial infection. This is going to install a tool, typically an information stealer like Raccoon Stealer or Azeroth, right, that is aimed at harvesting credentials and device configuration data. And as these credentials and configuration data are being harvested, they are sent back to the bots for collection. And these bots are positioned and deployed globally, and after a substantive amount of credentials have been harvested, in particularly credentials at the domain admin level, they are consolidated as logs. And once these credentials have been amassed, right, they will be peddled on the criminal underground, right? Examples include Russian Market, Market 2 Easy, and Genesis Store, right, are probably the three most prolific access broker shops today, right? And that achieves the financial objective of these access brokers. Now let's take a look at an example of one of the most prolific access brokers of the day. Right, this is a threat actor or an adversary that CrowdStrike tracks as Percussion Spider. Right, this is a prolific access broker based in Turkey and goes by a few different nom de guerre or handles on the criminal underground. Right, you can find, they go by, Percussion Spider also goes by Dramalu or Alvin Tarek on the criminal underground. Right, and even though Percussion Spider offers a wide portfolio of access being peddled, right, it actually has a laser focus on government, oil and gas, and technology companies. Right. What's interesting to note here, right, is that Percussion Spider actually partnered with the Thanos ransomware developer in the early days. Right, they were observed to be mutually boosting each other's reputation, right, or the digital equivalent of street cred, right, on the criminal underground. Right, this digital version of singing high praises of one another, being very good, at what each of them do, right, actually helped both Percussion Spider and the Thanos ransomware developer, right, to go a long way, right? Because this dynamic propelled Percussion Spider to become a prolific access broker and at the same time substantively increased the utilization of the Thanos ransomware. And as we speak, Percussion Spider continues to evolve their their capabilities while monetizing the sale of domain admin credentials, high profile access packages, and so on and so forth. And this gives you an overview of the targets, right, of Percussion Spider, right, and this should speak volumes of how prolific Percussion Spider is performing as an access broker today. And this is actually how it looks like in reality, right? This is an active thread on Exploit Forum where Percussion Spider is known to be peddling access packages, right? And this is just a few samples, right, of some of these access packages that Percussion Spider has been peddling of late. So now moving away from access brokers, right, now let's shift gears and look at malware-as-a-service for a few moments, right? And one of the best examples of a prolific eCrime adversary offering malware-as-a-service is none other than Smoky Spider, right? Smoky Spider is the criminal actor behind the development of the criminal loader, most commonly known as Smokebot, Smoke Loader, or Dofoy, right? Smokebot has been available on the criminal underground since 2011 and has gone through various changes since, right? The loader is primarily used to download and execute modules that is sold by Smoky Spider or third-party malware provided by the criminal operator. And for as long as Smokebot has existed, right, the actor, Smoky Spider, releases minor updates on a monthly basis with further major updates released annually. Right, this diligent maintenance of Smokebot, along with its affordability and flexibility, has led to the increasing popularity of the malware. And to give you a sense of how popular Smokebot is, right, this is the gamut of eCrime adversaries and malware operators that Smoky Spider sold access to Smokebot to. There are at least 7 named CrowdStrike eCrime adversaries that have a known history of buying access to Smokebot. And just look at the adjacent laundry list of information stealers, ransomware, downloaders, banking trojans, remote access tools, cryptocurrency stealers, proxy malware, and spam bot operators that all have a known nexus to Smoky Spider, right? Since the takedown of Emotet or Mummy Spider some time ago, right? Smoky Spider with Smokebot, right, probably comes close to being the next top contender, right, which epitomizes a successful and enduring malware-as-a-service provider, right, on the criminal underground today. And again, this is how it looks like in reality, right? This is an active thread on Again Exploit forum where Smoky Spider advertises the sale of Smokebot. In the spirit of product marketing, right, Smoky Spider provides an overview of Smokebot's capabilities, right, on the screenshot on the left, and Smokebot's pricing, right, on the screenshot on the right. And to provide the prospective buyer a sense of the UI and UX, right, of Smokebot, right, Smoky Spider also offers like screenshots of Smokebot's like GUI, right, on the thread where it's peddling Smokebot. So last but not least, right, let's shift gears again to look at the last, topic that we will discuss in terms of, when we are exploring this notion of everything as a service on the criminal underground. And now let's look at some of the most prolific crypting services that exist on the criminal underground today, right? And the use of crypting services, right, also known as packing or protection services, right, are provided by eCrime, vendors, right, to other actors, right, to prevent the detection of their malware by antivirus engines, right? Criminal vendors often refer to their ability to make malware undetectable as fully undetectable, or FUD, or FUD, right? And this process can involve various techniques, right, including the use of an automation pipeline, a standalone application that's provided by the vendor, or manual techniques performed by the vendor that encrypt or obfuscates, right, a final payload in order to thwart signature-based detections, right, on disk or in memory, right? And these are some of the most prolific examples of crypting services that exist today on the criminal underground. Let's first spend a few moments speaking to VIPcrypt and LuxCrypt, right? Both crypting services come highly recommended by one of the most prolific eCrime adversaries of the day. And this is none other than Pinchy Spider, right? Or the adversary behind the R-Evil or River Ransomware. In early June of this year, Pinchy Spider actually released a statement to their affiliates regarding the use of crypting services, right? And Pinchy Spider shared that they tested the Revil or R-Evil payloads, right, using VIPcrypt and LuxCrypt, right? VIPcrypt is actually advertised on the criminal underground by an actor known as Malapis or Mr. Lapis, right, depending on how you like to pronounce it, right? And Malapis has advertised, right, this service since at least July 2018, right, and charges $50, right, for crypting a single file and $500 for a weekly subscription, right? The actor offers a variety of options to a customer, right, including the crypting of .exe or DLL files, right, and alleges to employ various anti-emulation techniques, right, and a polymorphic engine to reduce detection rates by AV engines. LuxCrypt is advertised by an actor that goes by the same name, so the persona is also LuxCrypt, right? And LuxCrypt, the persona, right, advertises its services on the criminal, similarly advertises their services on the criminal underground, and actually has previously received positive feedback from a number of actors, right, including an access broker associated with Traveling Spider, right, the adversary behind the NemT, the Nephilim, and the NemTX ransomware. In terms of pricing, LuxCrypt charges about $35 to crypt a single file and offers a weekly rate equivalent to $15 or $17 per file. Right? LuxCrypt also claims to be a past customer of crypting services and alleges to be partners with various quote-unquote private projects, right, which is probably a reference to other eCrime adversaries and criminal groups. In this statement that Pinchy Spider released in June this year, right, they also shared the results, right, of the counter AV scans, right, of the R-Evil or Revil payloads after they were allegedly crypted using VIPcrypt and LuxCrypt, right? And the detection rates, right, were quite commendable, right? They were going around 10 to 12 out of 23 different AV engines. Around the same period of time, right, when Pinchy Spider provided their recommendations, a prominent moderator of Exploit Forum, right, posted a glowing review of yet another crypting service that goes by the name CasperCrypt, right? The moderator actually shared a detailed technical review of CasperCrypt and praised the service's use of a centralized panel, automated payment functions, and support for both 32-bit and 64-bit executables and other features. right? Casper Crypt has been advertised on Exploit and XSS since mid-May of this year and offers extensive functionalities. Right? It supports Windows 7 through 10, supports both 32 and 64-bit executables, and has rich anti-emulation features. Right? PEG files, right? PEG files that are pegged by Casper Crypt are automatically checked against the counter AV service avcheck.net, right? And an automatic refund is given if they are identified as malicious by more than 3 AV engines. And despite the praise, right, Casper Crypt faces competition from other services, as one would expect free market mechanics to be at play on the criminal underground. Another crypting service that's of note is Anarchy Crypt. Right? Anarchy Crypt was introduced in late August by a persona of the same name, right? And this persona has earlier advertised several remote access tools and even a ransomware builder. And consistent across all the earlier malware offerings, right, the persona communicates with interested buyers in the forum and via Telegram. And however, right, they only answer questions regarding the malware's functionality only strictly solely via Telegram. And this, it just implies that the persona is, takes robust OPSEC precautions. Right? And since being advertised, Anarchy Crypt received multiple positive reviews, right, regarding its functionality and the seller's responsiveness. Right? And to showcase Anarchy Crypt's capability, the persona consistently posted actual detect URLs from avcheck.net that prove that the crypter was not detected by antivirus software, right? And Anarchy Crypt services, offers 24/7 support and is allegedly developed and delivered by an experienced team. So I've come to the end of the section, right, around this deep dive on the criminal underground, right? And a very natural question, right, would then be, what does all this information really mean to me? To put all that we have discussed into context, right, let's look at a conceptual abstraction of a modern ransomware attack, right? And it starts typically with a malware downloader, right, with something like, Smokebot by Smoky Spider that we discussed, or BotBot, right, Lunar Spider by Lunar Spider. And this malware downloader is typically used to deploy a traditional banking Trojan, right, like TrickBot or CrackBot. Right, and then this banking Trojan is then used to facilitate lateral movement around, right, the network, right, around the victim's environment, right, typically using living off the land techniques or malware-free techniques, right, using native tools or legitimate third-party tools that already exist on these compromised endpoints, right, and this typically also involves the adversaries pulling down their own tooling, right, that eventually leads to something even more nefarious. And adversaries at this stage, right, are looking for the target organization's crown jewels, right? This could mean mission critical systems or data, or requisite like admin privileges, right, to achieve their eventual objectives, right, which typically takes the form of owning the domain controller, right, to achieve enterprise-wide deployment of the ransomware. And after they get to the mission critical systems or data, this is where the adversary would, steal and exfiltrate the sensitive data. And this all kind of comes to a close typically with the deployment of the ransomware proper, right? With Ryuk, right, Wizard Spider being the adversary behind it, and Black Matter, Carbon Spider being the adversary behind it, as just two examples. So as you would notice, right, in this eCrime attack sequence, right, an attack, right, can involve at least 3 or more eCrime adversaries, right, and this has yet to include the element of the access broker, or even the adversary that facilitates monetization, right, post-extortion, right. In sum, there is evidently, right, and very prolific and thriving eCrime ecosystem at work here, right. This abstraction of an eCrime attack is also essential, right, because despite the valiant efforts of many security teams today at attempting to stem ransomware deployment, right, by doing so, they are likely to miss the earlier stages, right, of an eCrime attack, right. Basically the stuff that happens upstream, right. It would be meaningful, therefore, right, to calibrate your detection, right, to ensure visibility on the stages upstream. And in a similar vein, it would also be productive to hunt for the attack vectors upstream to effectively defend yourself against an eCrime attack. Right? So now, understanding how an eCrime attack typically unfolds, how do you then get on the front foot against this threat? This really starts with intelligence consumption, right, which typically takes the form of reading intelligence reports, right? Boring or dry as it may sound, it truly matters, right? Because reading intelligence reports will allow you to establish a contextual understanding of the threat, right? Reading reports and understanding topics, right, like the eCrime attack sequence that we just covered in the slide before, or the trending attack vectors that target specific industries, right? Learning those lessons so that you can avoid becoming the next victim of a similar attack, right? It is a known common practice for adversaries to target victims of the same industry and will target those that they think that they will be able to monetize with a successful attack, right? Beyond the intelligence reports, we all should also acknowledge that technology is going to be a key enabler, right? First, there is that dimension around leveraging tools to programmatically achieve intelligence automation, right? To achieve intelligence-led security operations, right? You will also want to think about using a tool to proactively hunt and monitor the deep and dark web, right? To uncover incidents and developments on the criminal underground, such as the entire gamut of topics that we have discussed earlier today, right? And understanding how these developments on the criminal underground may have an impact on your organization. Of course, at the same time, we must also acknowledge that technology is not going to be a silver bullet solution, right? Having, 24/7 managed human-based threat hunting that sits on top of the technology, right? It's vital in preventing many of these modern attacks, right? Especially when it comes to living off-the-land techniques, it becomes exceedingly important, right, to have humans with eyes on the data, catching the unique hands-on keyboard activity, right, that technology just has a fundamental difficulty with identifying. And last but not least, should the unthinkable happen, it's always about having a service partner who's on speed dial that is ready to support you with timely response and remediation. And with that, I would like to leave you with this statement today, right? Really, your ability, right, to defeat the most advanced adversaries of the day, right, to outsmart the most sophisticated e-crime criminals out there, right, rests really upon your understanding of the problem, right? If you don't understand how an e-crime attack typically unfolds, or you don't know much about this prolific e-crime ecosystem and how these developments that take place on this underground, right, may impact your organization, right? What you're doing here is that you're just inadvertently preventing yourself to be effective in the fight against these adversaries. With that, I would like to thank you for your time and participation today. I look forward to your questions and know that I'm always a ping away and I'm happy to talk about all things cybersecurity. Once again, thank you very much for your time, and I wish everyone a fruitful time at SINCON 2021. Cheers.